Viene a Madrid para presentar su movimiento internacional contra la austeridad, el Plan B. ¿Cómo se puede articular? ¿Cuál es la fuerza que pueden tener los españoles, los portugueses, los italianos para combatir estas políticas?
The only alternative to the disintegration, which is exacting huge costs here in Spain, in France, in Italy, everywhere. The only alternative to this disintegration is for Europeans to get together on a very simple platform of democratizing the European institutions which are responsible for this continued debacle. And the only way we can do this is if we start thinking about our common problems and try to find common solutions to them. So this is why we got together in Berlin to launch our Democracy in Europe movement. This is why I'm here, to support my comrades here in Spain and the idea of considering alternative plans for Europe. This is what we must do throughout Europe in order to meet our obligations to the future of Europe.
¿Cómo se pueden democratizar las instituciones europeas?
That's a very interesting question, isn't it? How about through massive popular pressure? How did democracy come about? It didn't come about because the elites, the aristocrats decided, let's do democracy now. It happened because huge numbers of people pressurized and pressurized and pressurized until they gained the right to have their voices heard and the right to government through representatives that are democratically elected and who are accountable to those who elected them. Democracy has to be won, and it needs to be re-won in Europe because we've lost it. We still have it at the level of our municipalities, our cities, and our national governments. But this is not where the important decisions are made anymore. The important decisions are made in a democracy-free zone in Brussels and in Frankfurt. And the only thing we can do is revisit the struggles of generations, of hundreds of millions of European democrats who in the past decades and centuries, through mobilization, forced upon the powers that be democratic accountability. We need to do it again. We need to do it from scratch.
Usted defiende un proceso constituyente para 2025. ¿Cómo sería esa nueva Europa? ¿Habría una moneda única? ¿Sería distinta a la que tenemos ahora? ¿Habría un banco central distinto al que hoy tenemos?
One small correction. It's not that suddenly some of us decided that we have to change Europe by 2025. It's quite different to this. Europe is disintegrating all around us. It's collapsing. There will be no Europe by 2025. That is the message. Unless we democratize the European Union institutions. What should it be like? Well, how about the democratic federation? Where we have a federal government which is answerable to a proper parliament, not the one we have. Because what we have, splendid as it might be, and useful in some degree, it's not a parliament, because parliaments legislate. And Parliament should have the right to say to the Eurogroup, hang on a second, you made a decision that condemned Greece and Spain and Portugal and the whole of the Eurozone to a 5-year recession. You're fired. There's no such thing now. Wouldn't it be nice to have it? Now, of course, we can't have it now. Maybe we can have it within the next 10 years. It would be wonderful if we did. What we can do now is take two steps in that direction. The first one is massive transparency. Europeans need to know what are the mechanisms by which they're being ruled. They don't know, believe you me. I had to actually come out and say to Europeans, as a Minister of Finance, a member of the Eurogroup, that you know what? The Eurogroup doesn't exist in law, and there are no rules, and there are no minutes taken, and you will never know what we said on your behalf in there. I had to say that. This is astonishing. Second thing we need is through this activation of real politics, real democratic politics, in the cities, in the nations, in the European Parliament, everywhere in Europe, to present Europeans with options, to, in a sense, to destroy the myth that there is no alternative to what's going on, to show, for instance, how the central bank could be doing things differently, even within the existing rules and regulations and treaties, to show how the European Investment Bank could be financing, using existing rules, a Green New Deal for Europe that would create investment that gives jobs to Spaniards and creates hope for shared prosperity, to show how the stability mechanism could work to produce stability and not instability as it does now, to show how we can use the profits that are accumulating within the European system of central banks to fund an anti-poverty drive throughout Europe, not just in Spain and Greece, but also in Germany. If you show Europeans that these were possibilities, we could be doing this now and we're not doing it, this creates the democratic pressure for change. It's our only hope.
¿Existe todavía la crisis de la deuda? ¿Estamos en una situación en la que los problemas de la deuda y de las primas de riesgo de hace 2-3 años, pienso en España, en Italia y en Portugal, pueden renacer otra vez?
We're not going to rerun it because it never went away. We have the same crisis. But the crisis takes different forms. It's like a patient that suffers from one malaise, one cancer, let's say, and there are different symptoms. We go from symptoms that have to do with pain to symptoms that have to do with other functions of the body. The whatever it takes by Draghi, first the OMT program and then quantitative easing, what it did was it quelled the crisis from the bond markets. So the crisis in the bond markets stopped. But then it appeared somewhere else. Where did it appear? In the realm of investment. Investment collapsed throughout Europe. It is preposterous that today Germany has the lowest level of investment in its post-war history, even though interest rates are zero. That, if you just put it in your mind, you have zero interest rates, the lowest level of investment ever. What does this signify? It signifies that investors are scared. What are they scared of? They are scared that other investors like them will not be investing and therefore there will not be enough demand for the things they will be producing. So we're all caught up in this terrible failure, which is the result of the inability of Europe to get organized and manage centrally our debt and our investment. Now these are things that we should have tackled years ago. Why haven't we tackled them? Because unlike the United States, unlike Britain, unlike Japan, we don't have a functioning democracy. There is no one that will hold Mr. Thomas Wieser, the head of the Euro working group, who determines your lives here in Spain, and you don't even know his name. Not only have you not voted for him, but you don't know his name. No one is going to call him, nobody's going to fire him. Nobody's going to say, hang on, haven't you been doing this for now for 5-6 years? What was your achievement? What have you done to our European economy? You've destroyed it. You see, because if you are not known, if you're faceless, and if you are not answerable to any parliament, you keep doing the same thing. And the only thing you're interested in is not doing anything different, lest you admit that you made a mistake. So this is why democracy and a surge of democracy in Europe is essential for prosperity, for recovery, and for holding together the European Union.
Los paralelismos entre España y Grecia, el llamamiento a los paralelismos entre España y Grecia en estos años han sido constantes. ¿En qué se parecen y en qué se diferencian realmente la situación de España y de Grecia en estos años?
We are both part of a terrible macroeconomic architectural design. Spain and Greece are very different countries. Spain is a highly productive country. I wish my country was as productive as Spain is. You have magnificent industries in this country, and you have you were doing pretty well before the Eurozone was created in modernizing your industrial base and your economic base. We were not as good as that. We were far more corrupt, far less modern in our both the technology of production and the relations of production. But what we have in common is that we are both deficit countries in a common currency area. And you know what happens when you create a common currency? The first thing that happens is there is a tsunami of money coming from the surplus countries in the form of loans to the deficit countries. That happens every time you join different countries together monetarily. This tsunami of capital coming into Spain, coming into Greece, created bubbles. Real estate here, house prices went up, developments and so on, private sector debt went through the roof. In Greece it was public debt. The result was the same. When those bubbles burst, because bubbles burst at some point, then when you've got a Eurozone without any of the mechanisms of recycling deficits and surpluses in an optimal way, or even a suboptimal way, in some way, then what happens is you crush the deficit countries, and in order to stabilize the whole thing, this is what they did with the Troika in Greece, which then they brought here through the back door, and they didn't come officially, but they did come. Portugal, Ireland, and so on. And then what happens? Deflation is exported from our crashed economies to the core. This is what happened in the 1930s. It's a repetition of the same error.
Usted es experto en teoría de juegos, no sé si conoce la situación actual de negociaciones entre los partidos para formar un gobierno. ¿Cómo ve las estrategias y las alianzas desplegadas por los partidos españoles para pactar la investidura de un presidente? ¿Habrá elecciones? ¿No las habrá? ¿Usted qué cree?
Well, firstly, let me tell you that one of the things that I always taught my students about game theory is that if you try to apply it to real life situations, you're very dangerous. Game theory is a wonderful analytical tool for sharpening your mind. It doesn't help you understand reality. Same as economics, really. Now, what do I think about the political shenanigans here in this country? Well, you ended up with a very fractious parliament after December. The success story that Rajoy and the Troika wanted to propagate collapsed. But at the same time, you didn't have a rise of any of a particularly powerful alternative government sharing the one thing that needs to be shared, a determination to go to Brussels to negotiate. How this is going to pan out, I'm not in a position, I'm not qualified to pass judgment on, to comment on. But what I would like to stress once more is the importance of safeguarding Spanish democracy. The worst thing that can happen in this country is if a new government comes up, a progressive government, a different government to the previous one, which then goes to Brussels and at gunpoint is forced to do exactly what Rajoy was doing. Because that will make the average Spaniard think, why did I vote? What's the purpose of elections? Then what Dr. Schäuble said to me in the first Eurogroup will have been confirmed. And let me tell you what he said to me. I've said this before, I'll say it once more. He said to me when I was presenting our new freshly elected government's proposals for the Greek program of fiscal consolidation and so on, he said, elections cannot be allowed to change economic policy. Now, if that is the case, democracy is finished. And maybe we want to go the way of the Chinese Communist Party that also believes that elections shouldn't change anything. But I don't think we should. Firstly, because we have a different tradition here in Europe, but secondly, because democracy is essential. It's not a luxury. The reason why we need democracy is because otherwise the world is very nasty and very brutish.
¿Le recomendaría a Pablo Iglesias entrar en un gobierno o quedarse al margen del gobierno o a formar una coalición con el Partido Socialista?
I don't think that Pablo needs my advice. I'm convinced he knows that what matters is that the next Spanish government effects change, real change, and that cannot happen within the rules and the constraints imposed by the Troika and the Eurogroup. So either the next Spanish government is going to do another Rajoy, another model prisoner strategy of yes, we will do whatever you say, yes, we'll do whatever you say, or it will go to Brussels and say, it has failed, we want to renegotiate the parameters of the problem, not how to work within the parameters. I'm sure that Pablo Iglesias is fully aware of that and he's working towards that.
¿Qué papel jugó Luis de Guindos en las negociaciones con Grecia?
Well, first I have to tell you that in the Eurogroup I was sitting next to Luis and I got on very well with him personally, even though he never missed an opportunity in the Eurogroup, in his formal capacity, constantly to push for the failed program of the Troika in my country, clearly because his government's survival depended on our failure. There's no doubt about that. But I have absolutely no doubt that as an economist and financier, he understood my point, even though his position in the government and political expediency did not allow him to find a convergence between that which he thought and that which he said.
La última pregunta, ¿qué le aconsejaría usted, que ha negociado tanto con la Troika, a un futuro gobierno que fuese a negociar con Europa una situación distinta, unos parámetros distintos, una política económica distinta?
Internationalize your position. Make sure that the whole world, everyone, knows what your proposals are. You have to have well worked out proposals that include reforms that are progressive, recommendations about how to cleanse your banking system, which has not been cleansed, despite allegations to the opposite, on a policy on the debt, and most importantly, how to embed these policies for Spain in new parameters for the whole of the Eurozone. For instance, a policy of changing the ECB's quantitative easing program with emphasis not on purchasing debt, but public debt, but going into partnership with the European Investment Bank to create the investment that is necessary to pull all the various carriages of the Eurozone out of the mire and the mud in which they've been stuck. So there has to be a comprehensive policy by the next Spanish government for the Eurozone as a whole, an alternative to the Troika policy for the Eurozone as a whole, and for Spain. And you've got to make sure, this would be my recommendation to the next government, whichever one it turns out to be, that you make it clear to the Spanish people, to the German people, to the Dutch people, that this is a better alternative to the one we have.